Hello everybody, the Nameless Narcissist here once again, a simple man diagnosed with NPD, trying to tell you what's going on in my head and clear up some misconceptions about what pathological narcissism really is. Keep in mind, I am no clinician. I can only speak to my own experiences and the studies I read. However, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Anyways, so a topic today that I think is very contentious and very confusing, and if I'm being honest, I'm not even 100% sure of the answer, but I'm going to relate my own experiences and some of these studies that I've read and a couple of videos that I watched that have given me sort of a picture of what I assume pathological narcissism is like. How aware are we? Right? There's a lot of self-deception that happens in the NPD, obviously. So it would be natural to assume that people with NPD are not aware of their narcissistic behaviors. But the studies, there's very limited information on it, if I'm being honest. If you're familiar with personality disorders, you know that there is an egocentric degree in all personality disorders, not just NPD. All of them kind of assume that they are correct in their cognition, how they're perceiving the world, which makes sense. If you view the world in a specific way, why would you assume that you're wrong? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this is my perception. Why would I inherently doubt it? After a lot of treatment, I have a tendency to doubt my perception a lot, but that's a whole other topic. However, you may be familiar with a few studies done. They were linked in a Psychology Today article a few years back. I'll put that in the comments below. That shows that people with high narcissistic tendencies actually do have a degree of insight into their behavior. That they are narcissistic, arrogant. What else did they say that they were? Prone to exaggeration, power-oriented, stuff like that. But it's not so much that they are. So obviously they aren't denying these facts, but they view these as positive traits, which I think speaks to my experience a lot closer than outright denying that I was narcissistic. I always hear the narcissist prayer, right? It's like, oh, if I didn't do it, I didn't do it, or if it did, it didn't happen that way, or whatever. And then the last one is like, if I did it, they deserved it. That last one is way more like how I operated, especially unaware, than outright denial or outright just blame shifting or whatever. It was always just more of, yeah, I did that, and you deserved it, what do you want to do about it, more or less? Which wasn't a positive thing, obviously, but it kind of shows you where my head was at. It's not so much that I am in denial about the fact that I was doing bad things, it was that I thought my bad things were just. So part of the inspiration for making this video was actually a video that Dr. Romney made, which may surprise you if you have been on my channel for a while, because I don't have the highest opinion of Dr. Romney, but this video of hers, because I usually criticize the fact that I feel like she generalizes a lot in my opinion, and maybe I just haven't watched enough of her videos, and I think she's a little defeatist when it comes to the possibility of treatment for NPD. She does admit, though, that people with NPD can be treated, but she tends to say that 99% of the time that can't happen, which maybe, who knows. The one study that I have linked regularly shows that 53% of people of NPD in treatment do go into remission, but it's impossible to tell what proportion of people with NPD are going to treatment, so who knows. Anyway, she described 4 groups of people who are narcissistic and their degrees of awareness. She described the first group is kind of where I was when I was less, I say unaware, but when I say unaware, I more mean of how the disorder affected me in general. I was aware I was narcissistic, and even that I probably had narcissistic personality disorder, but I didn't really care. And she described basically these people as they could be they were the least likely to change because they kind of wore their narcissism as a badge of pride, right? These are people that are much more grandiose presenting, and these are people, in my mind, who their grandiose defenses are working very effectively before going through a collapse, so to speak. She also mentioned that there's some that were very self-righteous and had this very rigid moral view of the world, which I question whether that would be people with NPD or OCPD, because OCPD is very oftenly mistaken with pathological narcissism because they have almost a stereotypical view. They can sometimes have a very stereotypical presentation that people normally associate with NPD. They have a very rigid moral hierarchy in their head, and and in terms of that moral hierarchy, they're never wrong at all. That's only one aspect of it, and there's obviously a lot of presentations of OCPD, so it's not always going to be like that, but they could easily be mistaken. The second one is a group that I was surprised you mentioned. The people who are aware that they had narcissistic behaviors and were trying to change. They recognize that maybe somebody told them that they trusted, or maybe causing issues in their life. She said this was most often defeated, grandiose narcissists or vulnerable narcissists. And she described how being around them could be exhausting because these people are all constantly trying to fix their behaviors, but they're not, it doesn't always work. You know, for me, it's exhausting to always be, you know, watching myself and trying to regulate myself so I'm not acting callously or in an entitled way and stuff like that. So she could say they'd be prone to rages due to that. It's a frustration over the fact that I can't get it right. And I think that was kind of a fair description of these people. But yeah, is what it is. Then after that, she started describing two more groups that were part of the very much not aware. The third group being like these people who are very close to sociopathy, where they're very paranoid, they react to rage whenever they are confronted on anything they're doing wrong, et cetera, et cetera. There's not much else to say about them. And the fourth group, which I thought would be the most interesting group, where there was no rage whatsoever. These are just people who are like completely unaware of the fact that like their actions are having any impact on anybody, and they're just kind of like, what am I doing wrong? What do you mean? I don't understand. Which I find very funny. I think that's a very funny like idea right there of people just acting like grandiosely and just like assholes, and there's like, what am I doing wrong? I don't understand. Don't get me wrong, I've been like that. I feel like everybody with personality disorders, like to some degree, has had moments like that, but for it to be all pervasive is kind of funny. But she then went on to say that she believes that the first two groups were probably people who came from more spoiled backgrounds, and then the second two group were like the actual like suffered through abuse and stuff. And I have a different take on that because when I looked at 3 and 4, she mentioned this herself, I saw more obvious signs of psychopathy. 3 being sociopathy, so that'd be factor 2 psychopathy, and number 4, factor 1 psychopathy, which is more of the callous, and which is also very strongly associated with grandiosity. If you look up Jim Fallon on whatever, he has some YouTube videos up there. He was a guy who was completely unaware that he was a psychopath. He went years without knowing, and he was conducting a research study, and when he was basically scanning a bunch of people's brains looking for psychopathy in prison populations, and they had this model, and he picks one up and he's like, oh god, like, this guy's awful, holy crap, like, get this guy, like, electrocute this guy or something, like, he's gonna kill a bunch of people. But it turned out to be his own brain scan. Interesting, right? And he had no clue. Apparently when he told other people, they weren't as surprised as he would have expected them to be. Like, he wasn't doing any blatantly antisocial behaviors, but he could be a very callous person. Now, to back up, kind of what I'm saying is that I think that groups 3 and 4 match closer to psychopathy. I'm going to bring up a study called Viewing Pathological Narcissism Through the Lens of Self-enhancement. That's another study that I'll link in the comments. So basically they were basically trying to make a way to measure narcissism in a way that is consistent and actually measures narcissism, because it can be very hard, especially on self-report scales. And basically they identified 4 things that very accurately described people who are pathologically narcissistic. Self-enhancement, need for validation, explicit impression management, so like if I'm always like kind of watching myself, making sure I'm coming off good to other people, making sure that they're liking me and everything, and a drive for social dominance. And this kind of supports a lot of the other research on pathological narcissism, where it's like, okay, you're going to be fluctuating between grandiosity and vulnerability based on how much external validation you're going to be getting, which I think for those first 2 groups that I was talking about that Dr. Romney mentioned, the like proud of being narcissists, those guys are like getting enough of that external validation where they're like, oh, I have no need to change, this is working for me, et cetera, while the second group is like comes to a more full awareness and how this affects them because they are not getting that. But furthermore, to back up the breaking down into real pathological narcissism and the psychopathy groups that I've been mentioning, so this flex scale pointed out that there's two kinds of people who come off as narcissistic and that people normally associate with narcissism, but they were very distinct. The first group being the true narcissists, the people I was talking about who fit the self-enhancement, need for validation, impression management, social dominance. But there is also the other group who present as grandiose narcissists, but they were actually a variant of psychopathy. These people were very genuinely believed in their own self-importance and their just how great they were and stuff like that. And factor one psychopathy is very strongly tied to grandiosity. So you can kind of see how that would present like that. And they kind of went on to say that we have a very strong misunderstanding of pathological narcissism because we've been grouping these people who are essentially psychopaths in and have like a very secure self-esteem. They don't have the contingency or anything with this vulnerable population of people who are trying to be self-enhancing, trying to shore up their feelings of low self-esteem. And also by saying that, I'm not saying that like the psychopaths with grandiosity, I'm not saying that they are irredeemable. Some of them might be, but I do believe that anybody can change if they have the motivation to. I think those people would have way less motivation to than anybody else. So based on that study, I think that would more accurately portray the differences in self-awareness between people with NPD and like other people. Something very interesting too is that self-awareness was most often associated with openness on the 5-factor model, and openness was only associated with histrionic personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder on the like self-report measures. So I'm just saying, maybe we were more self-aware than other personality disorders. Not actually, probably not. But yeah, that's how I think. I think that's a good way to kind of break this down, and I do think it's important that we recognize if we are dealing with somebody who is narcissistic, that they might not be a pathological narcissist, they might just be a psychopath. And that leaves a lot of variation on how to, one, handle a situation like that, and two, like the possibility of recovery, because the prognosis for people with NPD isn't good. Well, maybe it's better than we think because we keep confusing these two groups, but it is possible. I believe, at least, I am a living example of that, and there's a couple other people out there that I know personally, or like, I don't know, look at Early Morning Barking. He's come a long way in terms of pathological narcissism. But then with psychopathy, it's a little different because they're not motivated by much other than personal gain. Which, again, not to say they're inhuman. I want to make that clear. I'm not trying to throw those people under the bus or anything. I hate when people with BPD are like, oh, well, at least we're not narcissists. I'm like, oh, come on. We're like cluster buddies, cluster cousins. Come on. But yeah, little bit of a rambly video right there. Apologize about that, but I hope you take something away from this. Again, I'll link those studies in the comments. Hope you all have a good day. Take your fucking meds.